In this episode, we have the opportunity to hear from Mark, who is a former Marakon consultant, Kellogg MBA, and now he's an entrepreneur who started My Guru, a premium tutoring agency. Mark is full of great stories about his background as a hockey player, his interest in building companies, and finally, some of the great experiences that he's had, both in consulting and as an entrepreneur. We have a pretty incredible guest today. I'm really excited to welcome Mark. Mark, I'm going to give you a chance in just a second to intro yourself, but we are going to hear a little bit about Mark's journey through, beyond, back weaving into consulting, the kind of ever, extending tentacles of the consulting experience, and just also hear a little bit about his personal story. So, Mark, why don't you go ahead and give your introduction, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Sure. So, my name is Mark Skoskiewicz. I've been in consulting, I guess, mostly but on and off for a little bit over 15 years. And so I did an undergraduate degree in finance at Indiana. And after that, I kind of networked my way into a firm called Marakon Associates and was there for 5 or 6 years. It's like a small boutique strategy consulting firm. After 5 or so years, I went and got an MBA from Kellogg. And when I was at Kellogg, I started an education company, essentially a tutoring business. So that was in like 2010. And after Kellogg, I continued to work on that somewhat as like a side project at first, and then it slowly got bigger, and now it has a few employees. But when I finished with Kellogg, I went back to Marakon as a manager, and I was there for a few more years. And then eventually I decided to take the leap and leave sort of the cushy job at Marakon, focus a little bit more on My Guru. I had my wife and I had our first child at that point. And so there was a few years where I actually focused primarily on the entrepreneurial thing with My Guru and did a little bit of just like independent consulting. And then my old mentor and boss, Tim, started a firm called TRC Advisory, which is yet again a small boutique strategy consulting firm. And so now that I spend a lot of my time on that now, as well as helping run My Guru. And so I'm kind of a entrepreneur mixed with strategy consultant. That's my story.
Some of my favorite breed of humans. So excited to have you on the call and the conversation today. Mark, what we're going to do is we're going to start with 5 fun questions just to get to know you a little bit. And then we're going to dive into the more serious, deep questions inside the call.
Good.
So the first one is a career that you could have pursued but didn't. Either you got a crazy career advice test when you were in high school, or, some recommendation from somebody or somebody that you admired that you thought you could have gone after and ended up not.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to overplay my skills here. This is not really fair for me to answer this way, but I'll answer this way anyway. Growing up, I was a pretty competitive, ice hockey player, and I'm not suggesting that there's a good chance at all that I ever could have actually played professional ice hockey, but there was I did have to make a decision after high school. There's this level in hockey between being a high school athlete and a college athlete where you go away and play like juniors. And I decided to not give that a shot and just go to college. So I guess that's my answer. I kind of sometimes wish I would have at least given it a shot to see what would have happened. Probably nothing, but there. I'm not a professional ice hockey player.
Do you still skate?
Yeah, I still, I help coach my son's team, and I skate, at least once a week. So still a big part of my life, I guess.
That's amazing. Great. The second one is the biggest risk that you've taken that's paid off.
Yeah, I think the first one, my first answer was a little bit out there. I think this answer is just going to be much more boring. I already described this, but I did decide to leave Marakon and do something somewhat entrepreneurial and kind of focus more on My Guru and have more flexibility to spend time with my son at a time when I wasn't as financially secure as I am now, and it was kind of stressful for my wife. And so, but I think it paid off. I have had a lot more flexibility, and things have worked out on the entrepreneurial side, and I've been able to find really interesting consulting experiences afterwards as well. So So yeah, I'd say that's my biggest risk.
Okay. Love it. Good. So highlight of 2020, the year that people seem to have trouble finding highlights in. What's been your highlight?
Geez, highlight of 2020. Basically after the shelter in place in Chicago and a lot of different parts of the country, I guess, I basically, I'd been spending a lot of time with my daughter and my son just on like the stuff that they like doing. So like she likes figure skating and he likes hockey. And so it really was just when those activities started up again and I was able to see them like not in the house, like cooped up, yelling at each other and like being generally unhappy and finally like out doing activities again in the real world. I mean, that's my highlight. So just breaking free and getting back into society was good.
Awesome. I love that one. Great. So I don't know if you've traveled yet, but if you have, the first place that you traveled kind of in the new COVID reality, and if you haven't traveled yet, the first place that you will travel or hope to travel.
Yeah. So the first place I traveled was over the first, for the past 4 years, we had gone, so I live in Chicago, and so New Buffalo, Michigan is like an hour away. And it's a real short trip that I had gone with my family, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in a row. And so when things opened up a little bit, I felt like we were taking a little bit of a risk because, you know, people weren't really traveling a lot. But yeah, we went for one night. We went to New Buffalo to kind of like have like a normal life again. And so that's again, another boring answer. It's an hour away from Chicago, but it did involve a hotel and it was a different state. So
that's totally awesome. Yeah. Great. Okay. And then final question this is a two-parter, kind of like a BCG question. Yeah. First part is Cubs or White Sox. Second part is New York or Chicago pizza.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm a White Sox fan. It was kind of a tough end of the little mini season here because they were looking really strong and then they kind of faded. And then, yeah, Chicago pizza.
Really? That's your only wrong answer you've given so far. Well done. All right, Mark. Well, that's great. It's good to get to know you a little bit. We can see that your family and your kind of engagement in your work is really important to you. And I'm excited to see how that unfolded as we go back through your history. So we're going to kind of just start at the beginning, if that's all right with you. And the first thing that I'm really interested in understanding is why you decided to go to your undergrad. And then while you were there, you said you networked your way into consulting. How did you even find out about it? What were the things that kind of piqued your interest in consulting at the time?
Yeah, so I have I think I have a bad habit of like evaluating my answers to questions instead of just answering them, but I'll do that again. So my answer to why I found my way to my undergrad, I find really it's sort of like it was a bit of a turning point in my life. So I wasn't like a bad high school student, but I wasn't a great one, and I'm not sure if I recognized how competitive the average student who wanted to go to a really good college needs to be or is. And so anyway, I wanted to go to like Northwestern, and then I wanted to go to Wisconsin-Madison, and then like my fallback school was U of I, and then I also applied to Indiana, and the only place I actually got into was Indiana, so it was kind of crushing. And I just realized that my GPA was, a B average wasn't like really going to cut it. And so that's how I found my way there. But when I got there, it was just it was a really solid experience. The business program is actually quite good and competitive and prepares you well. And I was kind of had a turning point in how I approached academics. So I got really serious about school and like got all A's and got into the honors program. And so it was all like really good. And so as I was like doing that at Indiana, I had no idea really what I wanted to do. And they would talk about like doing these informational interviews to kind of learn about different careers. And I did one with my uncle, who was like a business person, and I knew that he did something called consulting, and he had worked at McKinsey for a little bit. And he was laying it on pretty thick in terms of like, you'll learn so much, you'll learn about different parts of business, you'll get a lot of responsibility. And so I kind of did my research and started getting pretty obsessed with it. And so then I went back to him and I said, I don't know how to really, I know that there's some interviews on campus, but this was before my sophomore year. And he was able to get me this was before my junior year. He was able to get me an unpaid internship at this place called Marakon Associates. And so that's kind of how I networked into Marakon.
I call that the McKinsey hustle, when you start out being like, I'm just curious about it. And by the end, you're obsessing over wanting to get into consulting. Yeah, it's a McKinsey trait that they've somehow perfected. Awesome. Well, so you went to Marakon as a unpaid associate, but obviously became more than that there. So tell us about your early experience and how you transitioned that into full-time work.
So yeah, my early experience at Marakon was, I think, quite unique, but I think there's a lot to learn from it. So like I said, I came from Indiana, networked in. They didn't really have like an unpaid internship program, but it was, my uncle knew one of the partners and said, hey, my nephew is really motivated and he's a smart kid and he'll do this for free. And would anybody be interested in having him on one of like the local teams? So that was that first summer. And, I worked really hard, listened a lot, tried to ask questions, tried to contribute. And so they asked me back then for the next summer as a paid intern. That was, Marakon at the time was bigger than it is now. They did have like internship programs, so that wasn't that unheard of. So that was a bit more of a normal experience where I was literally put on a case team. But then again, like I did a good job. And so I was able to kind of bypass the official interview process, and I got an offer then after my internship. So, but what I always like to say is that my whole experience at Marakon as somebody who came in a somewhat non-traditional route and came from, like in Chicago at Marakon, they would only recruit from, like Northwestern is the only place they go to. It's a small place. That's a very good undergraduate school or program. So that's where they get almost everybody. And then their MBA hires are all from Kellogg or Booth. And so I was like the only one in the office who hadn't gone to one of those like somewhat more elite schools, and kind of always had a chip on my shoulder around like wanting to make sure that people knew that I was actually good at the job and a smart, hardworking guy, and didn't just have the job because my uncle knew one of the partners. Although that was kind of true, I think I happened to also be those other things. So I didn't quite feel like I fit in, but I was having like such a great experience. And then eventually I kind of grew into the role, I guess.
I love that. Well, what is one thing that you felt like you needed to get in to Marakon? You mentioned you had the hustle and the relationship, but I'm sure that they wouldn't have taken you if you were still a doofus. So there had to be something that they also saw in you. And then what is one thing that you feel like you gained differential skill in when you were there?
Yeah. I think what you need, or at least what I needed, was I guess I'm going to use the word courage, which is a weird word, but like just the courage to ask questions when you don't understand something, and speak up if you think you have an insightful point to make in a meeting. I think where I see a lot of younger consultants go wrong is not asking enough questions, and then kind of things go down a path so far where they're not quite understanding like really what the problem is or what the team is working on, and they get a little bit lost. So I think that was important, just being willing to ask questions to make sure you're keeping up. And then I think the differential skill that I got from Marakon early on was just being able to like track a work stream and understand how to prioritize things and get the most important thing done first, and then the next most important thing. And because if you spend 3 hours working on like the 7th most important thing that you should be working on, you'll get behind. You won't be able to get all of your work done. Your manager's going to get frustrated. The project is going to be in trouble. So kind of prioritization was a really important skill.
I love that. Well, then you decided to go get an MBA at a kind of one of those schools that you mentioned, right? One of the brands that you talked about. How did you decide to go to Kellogg, and what were you thinking about? Were there other schools that were on your list? What was it about Kellogg that made that the right decision? And how did you know it was the right time?
Yeah, I mean, this is another, I guess, less exciting answer. There are reasons why I started my guru related to not liking everything about consulting, but I was still liking consulting. I felt like I was good at it. Like I had a well-rounded skill set so that the analysis was not a problem. Communicating was not a problem. Managing work streams, I was getting experience managing people too. So I knew I wanted to come back. And if I went to go get an MBA, I was going to have an offer to come back as a manager, which would kind of allow me to bypass the sometimes uncertain process of like, do you get promoted in this round or not, because of whatever conversations happen behind closed doors. And so I that was attractive to me. And I knew that I was probably somebody they would be willing to sponsor, so they could get partially paid for. So it was about that time. And then it also happened to be a time, it was like the Great Recession. So there was a lot of uncertainty around like the firm, and it felt like a reasonable time to go do that. I chose Kellogg because, and by the way, I should say that honestly, I think a lot of people go to get an MBA, kind of viewing the actual academics, the stuff you'd learn as like a clear second or third reason. I do think it was like things related to operations or marketing theory that I hadn't really had much exposure to. Marakon was very heavy on like strategy and finance, and so I thought it would be helpful to like round out my skill set. So that's why Kellogg. This is a very boring answer, but they had that 1-year program, and I knew I wanted to go back into consulting, and I'm kind of a frugal guy, so I didn't want to have like such a high opportunity cost, and so I really focused on that 1-year program. That's why I went there.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
If you're enjoying learning about strategy and want to put it into action, one of the best ways to do that is by joining us on a future strategy sprint. Strategy Sprint is a 2-day training process, 1 day for skills and 1 day to plan with a team how to solve an actual case. Then we put you live with a client for an entire week with a coach that is a former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG staff member. Your coach will guide you through how to interact with a client, how to resolve data, and how to make great recommendations. Join us for the next strategy sprint by finding the link in the show notes and registering on our upcoming waitlist. We look forward to having you. If you had to do it over again, is there anything different that you would have done in your up to the end of Kellogg season of your career?
Up to the end of Kellogg, I think what I'd focus in on there is at Kellogg, because I was pretty clear that I was going to go back to consulting, and because I had, which I haven't really talked about much yet, but because at the beginning of Kellogg I had decided that like I had this entrepreneurial itch that I wanted to kind of scratch by starting up a little, a business at Kellogg, because I was spending time on that. I did not like invest my time and effort in like building a network or really having like an MBA experience, which I still kind of regret. So in my going all the way back to high school, I would have gotten better grades and gotten into more colleges. Then after that, I would have like more fully invested myself in the MBA program to like meet people and experience new things. So yeah.
So that's the downside of being too focused on the right things, is that sometimes the bigger picture actually, right, is kind of the long game. I love that. Thanks for that insight. Well, then tell us a little bit now about the launching of My Guru. At that point, there were a couple of things that start to happen at the same time, right? You have My Guru happening a little bit. And I'd love to know just the business thesis of it, where it started and where it's evolved to. But then you also had going back to Marakon, and then you have the season at TRC Advisory. So I'll let you just kind of unpack that for us so that you can can walk through what happened in the order that you think makes the most sense from the learning experience.
Yeah. So I think I started, and I'll be honest, I started something in business school. And I just wanted to do something, because one of the downsides of consulting is that although there's a ton of learning and you meet a lot of people, the fact is they're typically 3-month projects, and the deliverable is a PowerPoint document, usually, at least in the consulting that I was involved in. Mm-hmm. And you're selling ideas. So you aren't really involved in implementing the ideas, and there's a lot that it takes to actually execute against the ideas that you don't, at least in the type of consulting I did, don't get involved in. And so it was a little bit like, I felt like I was missing something about being a successful business person that I didn't want to miss. And I would look at some of the partners at Marakon, and I could tell that they had done this their whole life. And so when the conversation started getting into the actual nitty gritty of how to execute, they weren't as strong. And so I wanted to do something entrepreneurial at Kellogg. The thesis, the reason why I ended up being a tutoring company was I had done some tutoring as an undergrad at Indiana in finance and accounting. And I was just able to see how sometimes like the one-on-one instruction can really turn things around for somebody who just isn't kind of getting it in the class. So I became just sort of interested in the idea of finding kind of a better way to bring one-on-one instruction to more people. I'm gonna be honest, there's a lot of like tutoring agencies out there. So a one-on-one tutoring company is not like the most novel idea. So it was something that I understood because I had a little bit of experience as a tutor working for a private tutoring company. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I didn't have a ton of capital. I just kind of wanted to start going, learn about different marketing strategies, hiring people, starting a business. And so that kind of was why I followed that path. I don't know if I fully answered.
Absolutely. And I just want to call it one of the things that you said and just make sure that I heard it right. I think you said Marakon was a big ideas place and you were focused on selling the ideas. And one of the things that was actually attractive about this is that it wasn't a novel idea. That wasn't the point. It was execution focused. And you believed that there was a gap in the way that the idea that had been done before was going to be executed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I had been involved in selling ideas, and I wanted to be involved in something that was more, like the execution was the more important thing, right? Exactly. And I guess if somebody asked me like why would somebody work with My Guru versus some other tutoring company? I mean, the differentiators I do, and again, it goes back to execution. I have built relationships with like really experienced, generally very impressive tutors who are very good. And it's a pretty streamlined model where, because I haven't invested in like content development and a lot of like flashy technology, and I don't actually spend that much money on marketing. We really are able, through search engine optimization, when somebody Googles the right terms and finds our site, we're able to really provide I think a very good value. And then through that continued kind of organic search traffic and referrals, it's just sort of grown into something reasonably successful. So it's like quality tutors that allow you to maybe access to a tutor for the same price as taking a test prep class. And I think it's a lot more powerful to get to work one-on-one with a tutor. So that's kind of the thesis behind the My Guru business model.
Awesome. Now, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about My Guru, but I want to come back to it. Can you just talk a little bit about your exit from consulting? So you decided at some point that, you had gone back to Marakon, but there were these other things that you wanted to do. I'm curious if that was a critical mass for My Guru, if it was a timing thing. What was it that made you decide my season in, at least consulting as you had known it, was ending? And when did you decide to move on?
Yeah, I think the exit from consulting, so I do Kellogg, I start My Guru is going, I mean, the answer to your question is fundamentally going to be my personal situation. So I'm at Kellogg, start my Guru. It's something I work on like at night and on the weekends. But I'm traveling and I'm managing consulting projects, and I have to stay for at least 2 years because of the whole like getting business school paid for thing. So I'm there for so the 2 years ends. My Guru has gotten a little bit bigger. I have my first child. There's just a lot going on. And the idea of continuing to sort of travel and try to like be a dad and sort of, it's like, what is my Guru doing? If somebody needs to invest behind it or it's not going to be successful. So it just, that for those reasons, it was the right time to, I think, just step away and spend a little bit more time on that professionally.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit more about my Guru in a second, but then you also mentioned TRC Advisory, that your friend began this organization and has built it up. And so you're kind of splitting time now between my Guru and TRC Advisory. So can you talk about what made you go back into a form of consulting and what's different about TRC?
Yeah, I mean, two basic reasons. I mean, the one reason was that, Tim Romberger, who was like the founder of TRC Advisory, he was just a partner at Marakon for a long time. And he was like my mentor, my friend, and I enjoy working with him. So the one reason was just I wanted to help him build something that was interesting to me. And then the second reason, though, I would say, after having spent some time on my Guru and focused on the more execution oriented elements of that, I did start to miss a little bit some of the focus on different ideas all the time. And I think part of the problem was with how I approached my Guru. There are things that I could have been more aggressive and taken more risk with my Guru to be doing more interesting things with it. But I was finding I was spending a lot of my time on like customer service or like accounting. And those are not the most exciting things all the time. So yeah, I've found, and the reason why I do them both now is I get more out of both of them, because I'm kind of switching what I'm focused on, and I find the variety interesting. At the same time, I don't know if I'm able, I think at some point soon I'm going to have to make a decision because each one could use all of my time, But yeah, so, and then the TRC Advisory, I guess just a few comments on the thesis behind that. I think we've been able to bring kind of the approach and the thinking and the tools that we used at Marakon, which was a firm pretty focused on selling to like larger publicly traded companies. I mean, at some point in time, they would be happy to have a project with almost anybody, but I think at TRC, we've kind of focused more on like portfolio companies of private equity firms and just come in at a price point that allows us to work with smaller businesses, which I found really interesting because once you're working with smaller businesses, it's easier to have impact. You can actually get involved in some more like operational or execution oriented projects. And so I've had a really good experience working at like the smaller firm with smaller clients.
Love that. Well, I want to hear one more thing about my Guru, and then we're going to move on to a few points of career advice. So For my Guru, what makes it special? Why do people work with you over other people? And it could be as simple as they find you and they don't find others. And it could be as complex as the differential service you provide or the way that you explain it or something like that. But I think it would be amazing just to know what you believe some of the value statement is around the business.
Yeah, I do think it comes down to like the relative to the price. It's a very high quality like tutor that you're going to get connected with, and because we are small, there is a very high level of like customer service relative to a lot of the other options that people find. And so I do think that is the secret, kind of the secret sauce. It's just once somebody does find us, you realize you're working with somebody who really is an expert. And it's very clear that the company is is listening and wanting to make sure that it's a good experience for you. I think that a lot of the industry is investing behind really like kind of seemingly interesting like apps or programs or methodologies. But I just like at the end of the day, I come down to you need like the right skills and an expert kind of making it click for you. And we just continue to be focused on that. So I'm probably providing a rambling, long-winded answer when you ask for one reason, but yeah, it's the customer service and the tutor quality, I would say.
That's amazing. And you mentioned originally that you had this experience of doing finance and accounting tutoring. Have you guys, what are the realms of tutoring that you cover? And are there any specifically that you'd want to highlight for the audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the only thing that we don't clearly do is work with students like younger than high school. So it's like high school and above. I'd say half of what we do is all of the major standardized tests. So ACT, SAT, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, MCAT, all of those. And then over the years, like almost any like subject that somebody in high school or college might be taking, except for like you get into like the tail or the margins of some really kind of unique subjects you might not be able to help. But almost everything, if you're willing to work with somebody online, we can almost help with any subject. So half test prep, half high school and college and graduate level academic subjects.
Love it. Awesome. Great. And then I have a couple of career advice questions. So because you've done it all and have learned a lot along the way, I'm going to start with consulting. So what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give someone who is considering breaking into consulting, either in the earlier stages of their career or mid-career, like MBA or as an experienced hire?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned one earlier. I definitely think doing these like informational interviews just to like talk to people who actually do the job is important, just to learn about what it's actually like and to make sure that you would like it is one. And this is advice for somebody looking to break into strategy consulting specifically, right? Yeah. I don't think you can overemphasize, like at most of these places, this case interview process is just like, that is how you get in. So I happen to be an exception to that. I didn't actually have to do a case interview to start off at Marakon because of the internship path, but you got to practice those and take it very seriously. And then I guess my third piece of advice would be, don't just rely on the typical like case interview process. If you've decided you want to do it, like I'm an example of a way to kind of like find your way in. So if you're looking to get into consulting, I guess it would be learn about it to make sure you're going to like it, because it's a pretty intense career. Secondly, it would be you're going to have to practice case interviews. And then thirdly, look at all the different routes to find your way in. There's small firms, there's big firms. It doesn't have to be like one of the big 3 firms with on-campus recruiting.
Love that. Great. And so what is one thing that you think should be a feature of people going into consulting? And what is one thing that you think that they don't learn in consulting, just to create more real expectations around some of the skills you learn and the experience you have versus, like you've mentioned, some of the skills that you don't learn or don't have, or the experiences that you don't have? What are the ones that you would highlight there, the top for each? So just to start with, the things that you will learn when you get into consulting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I reflect on a lot is just how often we have to like deal with uncertainty. So I think like in school, very typically there's like a straight path, like you're going to be tested on this thing, and so you practice it. In consulting, you very quickly learn, like you come out of a meeting, you think in your head it's clear what you need to do,
but then you realize somebody else heard something different, and then you have another follow-up meeting with your partner and he's telling you something kind of different. And so just the whole process of dealing with that and working on things that are not 100% clear is one thing that I think you get out of consulting. And I haven't actually worked in a corporate role, but I think sometimes corporate roles can be a lot less like that, because you're in finance and this is the thing that you do or you don't do. So that's one. I think for like a young person coming out of undergrad in consulting, I'm sure you can be successful if you have like the personality where you just work super hard and you're doing the analysis and you're pretty quiet. But I think most of the time you have to learn to like be comfortable communicating, at least for me, communicating up and down the organization more than I would have been comfortable with. So you get better at just like talking and projecting confidence and having opinions. Then I know that I picked that up in consulting for sure. And then I think like there are some types of consulting or some projects. I know I ran into a few people at Marakon who actually didn't do much analysis, but like you'll come out of consulting with analytical skills that you probably didn't have before you entered. So those are the three things you get. So, and then you were also asking, what don't you get? Are the things you don't?
Because sometimes I think it feels like this, magical universe where you get everything that you could possibly want. But there are, of course, things that you don't do that because you're focusing on some of those other things that we've talked about. What do you think those are that you don't get inside consulting? And if you're looking for those, make it either not the right field for you or you need to get them on the side.
Yeah, and I think I've hit on some of them already, but I think one of the things that it's hard to get, especially like, let's say you spend 5-6 years in consulting, and then you're interviewing for a job that asks you like, can you describe like some clear examples of like having a financial impact or something on a project. And I think sometimes inside of an organization, you can point to like, well, we worked on this new product, we worked on it, we launched it, it went well, we made $15 million or something. I think in consulting, you have to sort of spin a story sometimes because you're not exactly sure how things ended up, and you truly weren't necessarily a part of taking it to fruition. So I do think that's one thing that you don't get all the time, that end to end, the idea, the execution, and the result. And then I think like the other thing that you don't always get is, and it depends on your project and it depends on where you're working. But there are some consultants that I think go quite a few years at Marakon or at TRC and get frustrated because they really haven't had the opportunity to like manage somebody else and get some of these like leadership soft skills. And I think you actually get them. You're like managing clients, but I think some people are desiring like the idea to be like the boss of somebody else, and that doesn't always naturally happen. So yeah, I don't know, but really honestly, my answer would be overweighted towards that first answer. Like consulting is often about ideas and it's less about execution, and that's what I think is sometimes missing.
Okay, amazing. Thanks. 1 year ago, we polled Fortune 500 executives and asked them what their top pain point was inside organizations. Expecting the answer to be analytics, we were shocked to find that it wasn't. Instead, the executives said that their biggest problem was prioritization. The people on their teams did not focus on what was most important to them or to the business. At Management Consulted, we have a core foundational training on the pyramid principle, which is the way that we were trained inside top consulting firms to get razor sharp focus immediately on the biggest problems an organization faces. And we can train your organization too. With top clients that are in the Fortune 100, we have a great roster that we can explain how we've made a difference inside organizations. Please reach out for more information at managementconsulted.com. And then final question, what is one skill that you would encourage people to invest in starting right now that you think is valuable for entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I go back, I mentioned it early, but I think like the ability to prioritize is so important. Like when you're an entrepreneur, and I think this applies even in a consulting project, if you have a lot of different things you need to be doing. But if you're not like constantly evaluating like what's going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of the investment of your time and energy, like you can really slow down the growth of your company because you're spending too much time on things that don't matter. So finding a way to figure out like what matters the most and what is deserving of your attention, which might be different than like what you enjoy doing or what you're comfortable doing, is probably my biggest thing.
Awesome. Mark, is there anything else that you would want to share with people that I haven't covered in my questions today?
I don't think so. I hope it came across though that like I'm really happy that I, started my career in consulting. I think it's hard to imagine like you can go in so many different directions that provide such a nice foundation. I think it's important though after a few years to, if you're not going to do it forever, once you have that foundation to make a jump. But yeah, it's a great place to start for sure.
So similar to my story, except I was much worse behaved when I first started. I kind of went kicking and screaming into it, maybe a little less certain of the goodness of it, and have come to realize over the fruitfulness of a long term what a powerful decision it was to go into it. So I fully agree with you, but I don't know that I was that enlightened early on in the same way that you are. Yeah. So thanks, Mark, for sharing. I'm going to open up the floor now for other folks to ask questions. So if you all have questions, you can either raise your hand or you can pop questions into the chat bar, and I'll moderate for our final 15 minutes so that Mark, the wise, my guru, can share with us some of his personal perspective. All right, I'm going to ask another fun question while folks are thinking about theirs, and then I'll come back to the chat in just a second. So it sounds like you've been in the Chicagoland area for most of your life. If you couldn't live there, where would you live?
I really like, so I'm Polish, so my two answers would be, I think it'd be just interesting to live in the, in the region of my ancestors, I guess, for some period of time. And then I also just going back, kind of just the whole culture around hockey growing up, like north in Canada, I wouldn't mind living there either. So
I love that.
Poland or Canada.
Poland or Canada. I think that's such an unusual thing. Okay, second fun question. What percentage of the time would you say people pronounce your last name correctly?
That's a funny question. I mean, that's pretty low. Like 3.
Under 10%, around 25%?
Yeah,
under 10.
Yeah, under 10. 5% or less, yeah.
That a lot of people get my last name wrong, and I don't feel like it's that hard. But I bet there are people that are just kind of like Mark, right? Just pretending it's not there.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was in the grocery store, and I don't know how this happened, but I ended up talking to like an old woman, a Polish woman, and we started talking, and she asked me how I pronounce my name, and she was telling me that I pronounce it wrong. I'm like, well, my grandma's from Poland, and that's how she pronounces it. So it's like, I don't know, it's like impossible to pronounce, even if you're from Poland.
That's amazing. She told you that you were pronouncing your last name wrong.
She told me that, right, exactly.
That's incredible. Well, we've got some good questions that have popped into the chat bar, so I'm going to go ahead and pull these in. First, I love this one. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of working for a smaller consulting firm over MBB?
Yeah, that's a good. So there's some just very concrete ways that I would answer that to start. So I have this hunch that from 401k matches to time off to XYZ, I just think there are probably like this range of benefits that you get at an MBB that you don't get at a lot of smaller consulting firms, like kind of more financial or lifestyle benefits that maybe add up quite a bit. I think another category of benefit of MBB is just, I can put on my resume that I worked at Marakon Associates or TRC Advisory if I ever decide to do something different that requires a resume. But, I can describe what I did and that means something. But, if it says McKinsey or Bain or BCG, I think that branding is very valuable. I think it's very important. So you get that, obviously. From what I can tell, though, I think that sometimes smaller consulting firms, it's going to be very volatile, but you could have experiences that aren't as good. But I think sometimes you can be put in positions of leadership and responsibility and be doing work that's incredibly impactful at, beyond your years, because you work at a small place that doesn't have the resources to staff that particular project. So I think a smaller firm can really build your skills in the actual doing of the work. Now, I'll give you one more, though. The actual academic training at an MBB is probably often much better than smaller consulting firms. So,
from a learning development perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, those are great. Good insights. Let's see here. One of the questions was whether or not you think, and you're in consulting right now, obviously with TRC, but do you think the pandemic will cause a permanent paradigm shift in consulting? And if so, in what way?
Yeah. So, for me, I've been thinking about this a lot because I still think I need to eventually decide to spend more time on my guru, the entrepreneurial path, because it just needs it if it's going to have a chance to be really successful. But one of the things I don't love about consulting traditionally is, all of the travel, which sometimes has traditionally felt unnecessary to me. I mean, I understand being in a room with somebody is important. But I'm already sensing that is probably going to be different for quite a while. And I think people are probably going to learn that there is a lot, even 5-6 years from now, with hopefully the pandemic is completely behind us, where there's probably going to be a lot more remote work, which could lead towards, I think, people being increasingly comfortable outsourcing different types of work. And so, yeah, I do think there could be a difference in how consulting gets done over the long term, for sure. And I kind of see that a little bit with our current clients.
I have a question for that, because I know that a lot of people say that once you've built the relationship, it is easier to manage remotely, but sometimes it's hard to build it. Have you done a sales cycle in the consulting firm within the realm of the pandemic in the last couple of months? Have you been able to begin a new relationship remotely only?
Yeah, good question. We have one very clear example of successfully doing that. So and for the first time, I'm not involved in the project, but yeah, we actually had a team. So all of the selling was done, on Zoom, and then but we actually sent a team for the kickoff to Minneapolis on a plane in person this week, which we had to go through a whole process of asking who at TRC would be comfortable even doing that. So yeah, we did one sale.
Cool. And do you think, so I think that's where a lot of the learnings are going to come, right? The new relationships, the new patterns, the new building. And I think if we're able to do that successfully, I think you're right. It could really endure.
Yeah.
So then another question is, what are your thoughts on some of the MBB firms in particular opening these implementation practices? So they have always had the idea part of the work, but then they have an implementation side of the business. What do you think about that as a strategy, and also about the kind of different kinds of work that you do in the two places?
Yeah, as a strategy, I think it makes sense. I mean, the Bain, McKinsey, and BCG, as a consultant for 15 years who has always worked for a small firm, I even see, I have one particular client now who really trusts us and spends a good amount of money on us. And we work on a lot of different things. but they still have they still have Bain in doing like various things. And so when you have like the reputation for being able to bring extremely smart people into the firm for a project, and you can do the work, and it can go all the way up to like the board of directors, and everybody understands that it was a good decision because BCG did it or what have you. I don't really see the downside of not trying to have an implementation practice so that you can do the recommendation and then implement it as well. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. What I have seen, though, to add a little bit of an interesting flavor to it, I have had a few colleagues who worked at Marakon and went and got an MBA and decided, you know what, I'm not going to go back to Marakon. I'm going to go to one of the big firms because I want to have that brand, and I think it might be a different experience, and I might be able to build a better network, and have gotten staffed on like more due diligence type projects or like integration projects. And they came away with a bad taste in their, like they did not like that experience. So the people actually working on the projects didn't like it. So that could be an issue in terms of like balancing the happiness of your employees.
Absolutely. Good. Well, I have one final question for you, and this one I think is a really good one. And I get this a lot, so I'm curious about your perspective. The pandemic has now caused a shift in the way that consultants are interacting, as you mentioned before, the higher comfort with remote work, especially when everyone is working remotely. But I get a lot of questions about how tech is, and we think will, disrupt the industry. And I want to actually tack on one of my questions to it that people ask me. Why are people necessary in consulting? Why can't computers and big data and AI do the job, or can it? What do you think about some of those changing dynamics about the introduction and the advancement of technology in consulting?
Yeah, that happens to be something that I've also been thinking about recently, because we have a client who, I'll turn it into a bit of a funny story. He was quoted in like a CFO magazine as talking about like how they think about big data and how they're using AI to start to begin to get at different insights. And I just know like that is totally untrue. Like they're so early on in doing anything like that. And
it's Excel. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so I think that there is so frequently like an important story behind the data that needs to be told. And I do believe that there's probably going to be a movement towards AI, and that it makes sense for companies to invest behind that. But I can't imagine that it will be that quick. It seems to me that it's more of like I guess in my experience, you're going to have new tools, better ways to analyze data, and you're going to need to have people who know how to use those tools and to get the most out of them. But if a company were to like say, well, great, now I have this tool, so I can like not invest in the right people, I think they're probably going to be in a pretty bad place. Yeah, that's an interesting problem. I would say, like in my personal opinion, if I was like an accountant that worked for small businesses, I would be much more worried, because it seems like you can kind of automate the process of like doing accounting a lot more easily than you can like dig into the data of a large company and figure out what matters and what doesn't.
I agree wholeheartedly. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with rules, right? If the rules are super clear and there's a single way that you're supposed to do something, it's much easier to automate. But if you have this massive amount of inputs, both qualitative and quantitative, and you also have a massive number of outcomes, none of which are qualitatively viewed as better or worse than others, and they have a bunch of different elements to them, it just adds to the complexity of what you're trying to put through a decision-making system. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you and your joining us today. You're answering some questions of mine and also questions of the audience. And so we are excited to see what the future of My Guru holds and excited to get this conversation out onto our platforms. So thanks again for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a good time.
Thanks so much for listening to this amazing podcast episode with Mark. We hope that you enjoyed it and are excited to join us again. If you are, please subscribe to the podcast, review it, and even better, share it with somebody who you know would enjoy it as well. In addition, if you would be interested in being on the podcast as a featured guest, either doing a live case or telling your story, we would love to hear from you. Finally, if you have recommendations of someone else who would be a great guest on the podcast, please send their name over and we'll reach out directly. You can reach us at team@managementconsulted.com. Thanks again for listening.